Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Bullen, president of the Phoenix Friends of C.G. I'd like to thank you for attending our program today. I think it's going to be really interesting. I have a few general announcements to make, and then we'll carry on. First of all, I would ask everybody to leave themselves on mute when they're not talking. That way we won't get much in the way of background noise. Secondly, let me give you a little bit of a rundown as to how this will work. Dr. Herman will do a presentation for give or take an hour. Then there'll be about 15 minutes for Q&A relative to what he was speaking on. Then we'll take a break. Then when we come back from the break, he'll give an additional short presentation, which will then lead us into some active imagination exercise work. And then once that's completed, there'll be another opportunity for further Q&A and discussion. So that's basically the format of today's program. Then the other thing I would like to say is I'd like to encourage everybody to come to our next programs, which will be in December, sort of late in the year. On the 21st, we're going to have Dr. Dennis Merritt. He'll be speaking to us. Then in January, we're going to have Dr. Judson Davis. And then in March, we're working on a big event, which will be an in-person program. The details of that are yet to be totally hashed out, but that's going to be really exciting. The person that we've got who we're thinking of is very well known in the Jungian world, and everybody should be very glad to come to that program, which will be, again, as I mentioned, in person. Anyway, let me turn it over to Will, who is our program chair. He'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Herman, and then we'll carry on with the program. So Will, take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning. It's my honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Stephen Herman, a Jungian depth psychotherapist practicing with 35 years of experience. Dr. Herman is an active member of the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco, the International Association for Analytical Psychology, the International Association for Jungian Studies, and the California Association for Marriage and Family Therapists. He began his clinical journey as a child and family therapist and has since spent over 2 decades in private practice, primarily supporting adults in Montclair, Oakland, California. Dr. Herman brings a wealth of knowledge in the areas of adult career transitions and vocational development. He wrote his master's thesis on vocational dreams at John F. Kennedy University, where he later taught in the career development program. He earned his doctorate in clinical psychology and has published 7 books and several essays on Jungian psychology, literary criticism, spiritual democracy, theology, and Western yoga. Dr. Herman is dedicated to helping individuals explore the unconscious to unlock creativity and foster personal growth and meaning. And his approach focuses on following the unconscious communications from the inner voice. As a prolific writer and speaker within the Jungian field, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Stephen Herman.
Thank you very much, Will. That was a nice introduction. I appreciate that. And I want to also thank Charlie for your generosity and making available the book for those who are attending. So thanks to both of you for the introduction. And I'm going to start with a presentation. So I'm going to do a slide share here. PowerPoint, and then we'll get started. So Will said quite a bit there. I don't have to go through all of my background history now. I do want to zero in, though, on this hypothesis that I developed when I was at John F. Kennedy University in my master's thesis research, which was a study of 10 individuals who had a vocational dream in early adulthood. And I'll tell you how I got into this subject as I proceed. But I developed this idea of a nuclear symbol a hypothesis. And by that, I mean an organizing symbol that's often constellated in one's childhood, early childhood through latency, up to 11 years old, sometimes in adolescence as well. It's not always the case that a vocational archetype or a calling archetype, as I call them, will be constellated in a person's dreams or fantasy life, play activities, or storytelling. But that's how it appeared in the research. So in 1987, I was licensed as a marriage, family, and child counselor. That was before the license changed to MFT, marriage and family therapist. But it used to be child counselor was in there. I did my internship at Lincoln Child Center in Oakland, California, where I saw boys in residential treatment, latency age boys. And I had the opportunity to work with a young Native American Caucasian boy, white boy, who was part Plains Indian. And I'll show you a few slides from his sand play work that he did. This case confirmed the hypothesis that I had found in the dreams of adults, that oftentimes a vocation starts at a very early age. So let's see what's going on here. There we go. So this is the front copy of my book. It was published in June of this year. Here we have the front door of C.G. Jung's house in Kusnacht. And he had this inscription carved on the front of the doorway entering into the house. Vocatus atque non vocatus, vocatus Deus aderit, which translates from the Latin into called or not called, God will be present. So when you went into C.G. Jung's house, whether you were called or not, God would be there as a presence. You could say the God archetype or the God principle was present in Jung himself. It's wonderful to have so many societies like this, Jung societies such as yours in Phoenix, friends of Jung that are continuing in this tradition that started in Zurich. And I took this picture in 2008 when I gave a presentation of a 5-year-old boy. One of the things that happened in my research, which surprised me, was that I had a vocational dream myself as I was analyzing the data in my grounded theory research at Kennedy of these 10 individuals, where I found myself back in my elementary school in the 2nd grade, and I was listening to the teacher, Mrs. Rasmussen was her name, and she was reading stories from the Native American tribes about the vision quest, and my ears perked up. And when I woke up from the dream, my heart was beating. I had a sense of something energetic happening in my psyche. And that's an indication that you're in the presence of an archetype. It's what Carl Jung referred to as the numinous. He got that from, as you probably know, some of you, Rudolf Otto's book Das Heilige, or the Holy, where he coined the term numinosity, which is to get to be given a nod by the divinity. So you could say that when you went into Jung's house, you were being given a nod. And if you had a numinous experience in meeting Jung, then sometimes it could correspond with a vocation, a calling archetype that is evoked in the presence of a great master like that. For me, it happened in a different way. I had been reading Jung very deeply from my 20th year till the time I got to UC Santa Cruz. And I'd read more than half of the collected works of Jung and his letters, and many books by classical Jungians about Jung and his psychology. So by the time I got to Santa Cruz, I was already on the way to becoming a Jungian analyst, but I hadn't yet had it confirmed from the outside. My first psychotherapist had given me a nod, you could say, and told me I had that potential, but it wasn't until I started teaching at Santa Cruz at the age of 24 that something really switched on through what Erich Neumann, the Israeli Jungian analyst, called evocation. That the archetype of the healer was evoked in me. But in that experience I was talking about of having that dream when I was doing my dream research at Kennedy, I remembered the play activities that I was doing at that age, where I discovered the vision quest as a ritual, a rite of passage in adolescence, sometimes even earlier for these young indigenous boys or girls. That I was playing a little activity with a healer, a shaman figure, who would engage in talks, give speeches, and talk about healing animals and about peace and as an antidote to war. So I was already engaged in a play activity, and it's what Jung did on the shore of Lake Zurich after his break with Freud. He began playing little games that he played as a boy. And that's when he remembered the dream from the age of 3 of the underground phallus. This was a very famous dream that Jung recorded. It formed what I call the nuclear symbol of his childhood. For me, the nuclear symbol was represented by a king snake. I used to catch the snakes or just observe them in nature in Pleasant Hill, which is in Contra Costa County, with a view on Mount Diablo. And it's the natural predator of the rattlesnake. So it's a constrictor and will swallow a rattlesnake whole and is immune to the poison. It was my favorite snake. And I had that painted on my drum. This is a Taos drum that I got in 1995 from the Taos Pueblo, which Jung visited in 1925 with Jaime D'Angelo, who was here in the Bay Area, a very well published poet and anthropologist. I was very into anthropology and archaeology as a result of this early influence by this teacher who read me these stories in our whole class. But that always stayed with me. And it wasn't until I had that dream that I remembered the significance of childhood events in helping to activate my calling. The word vocatus in Latin means to be addressed by a voice or to be called beyond the known. And Jung speaks about this at length in his essay, The Development of the Personality, 1932, that one is called by an inner voice. And that's what I'll talk about. I've had hundreds of dreams about this snake, the king snake. So I had it painted on the drum by a natural artist from a herpetology book. Now, I used to play these games with my friend. He was part Filipino and half Apache. His father was from the Apache tribe in Arizona, by the way. In my dissertation research, when I did anthropological studies at the Lowy Anthropology Library in Berkeley, I found the case study of a young 5-year-old boy from the Maricopa tribe, which some of you may be familiar with, the Maricopa area of Arizona. He had a dream of a vulture coming and giving him the feathers of the vulture to heal with, to use in his ritual. So I found this hypothesis confirmed of a nuclear symbol. The vulture came to him, or Capit the turtle, or the lizard came to him and spoke to him in dreams at the age of 5. So we find this phenomenon extensively, and it's not just here in the United States, it's throughout the whole world, also in Southeast Asia. I have a whole section on that in the last chapter of my book on the inspirational dream in Southeast Asia. And we see it in shamanism. The shaman often has a calling, such as the great Oglala Sioux shaman Black Elk, who had a vision at the age of 9 of being transported up into the rainbow teepee and initiated by the elders. This is a phenomenon that's universal. But what this teacher had evoked in me was the archetype of the shaman or the medicine man or the visionary of the tribe. And interestingly, that's how I found my way into Jungian psychology. How I found Jung was because of my interest in this phenomenon. So how did I get into this subject, this area of research? It's a personal story. I was William Everson's teaching assistant at UC Santa Cruz. Now, William Everson was a very well-known Catholic poet during the Beat generation here in the Bay Area. He was known as Brother Antoninus. He studied with Victor White, who knew Carl Jung, was personal friends with Jung, at St. Albert's College, a Dominican monastery here in Oakland. So I met Bill at Santa Cruz when he had taken off his habit as Brother Antoninus, and now he was William Everson, the poet shaman. He had a bear claw necklace and a buckskin vest he would wear. And the course had 100 students in it, and I was selected as his teaching assistant to teach Jung and lead the dream groups. And the aim of the course was to see if you could confirm your vocation through your dream life. Now, this was a very unusual course because, first of all, he didn't have a college degree. He dropped out of Fresno State and became a poet. He was a janitor at UC Berkeley and won a Guggenheim as a janitor. So he was doing janitorial work. But, here he was winning a poetry prize because that was his calling, his vocation. He dropped out of Fresno State when he pulled a book off the shelf by Robinson Jeffers, and it changed his life. Ultimately, he was never the same after that. Once he began reading the verses of Jeffers. I want to talk a little bit about vocational dreams in science, because the whole idea of the nuclear symbol came to me as I was doing this research and reading Jung and reading Heinz Kohut, who was a very well-known psychoanalyst and developed the idea of the nuclear self. I think he got it from William James, because James also talked about the nuclear self. But I like the idea, but he wasn't, as a psychoanalyst, that into symbolism. And of course, as a Jungian, symbolism is everywhere. You know, the living symbol, the symbolic life. You know, the whole vision quest is a quest for a symbol. You could say a guiding symbol, or plural, a group of symbols. You could say, because we don't just have one calling. We have numerous callings or numerous vocational archetypes. Nevertheless, I did hypothesize that there was one that's central in the personality, and that's what I called the nuclear symbol. I later learned that it's a theory in modern physics, and I'll talk about that a little bit, because the most famous example of a nuclear symbol in physics is the dream of Niels Bohr, who dreamt that he was standing in the boiling gaseous center of the sun, and around him was revolving the 9 planets. And when he woke up, he hypothesized or theorized that the atom consists of a nucleus, and around it are electrons that revolve or that have motion in relationship to that nuclear center. So I was aware of that hypothesis because I had read Einstein's biography. And of course, Carl Jung's relationship with Wolfgang Pauli was instrumental in his development of his theory of synchronicity, that there's an acausal connection between mind and matter, and between archetypal phenomenon and external coincidences that are beyond merely mere coincidence. They're meaningful coincidences. They have a significance, and that significance often has something to do with one's destiny pattern. So when I met this man, William Everson, I was like, it was like a devotional thing almost. He was almost like, to me, what in the East would be called a guru for a period of time. And you know, I was put in charge as his teaching assistant, so it was a really great honor. I was very humbled by it. So I ended up writing my thesis on Meister Eckhart, who was a Dominican, and I published a book also on Meister Eckhart recently, and Carl Jung, because Jung had been reading Meister Eckhart at the age of 15, and I think Eckhart was the greatest Dominican theologian, and that's what I put forward in my book. This here is a picture of a sand painting from the Navajo, also of Arizona. This is a healing mandala, what Jung called a mandala, from the Sanskrit word. And it's from the Endless Snake sand painting from the Beauty Chant. Don Sandner was my analyst. He published the book Navajo Symbols of Healing. And I love this, picture because it really, I think, gives you a visual image of what I'm talking about when I use the term nuclear symbol, because you can see the snake in the center, and then the 4 snakes at the edges there, but around it is this endless snake that could be more like the cosmic dimension that connects us to the metaphysical, you see, to the transcendental, because Jung really limited his psychology to science. And I'll tell you why, because he had a vocational dream when he was at the University of Basel. And many of you may know this because you've read his autobiography. And he was in a wood, in a forested area, and he came to a pool. And in the pool was a round organism. It's called a radiolarian in natural science. And it was shimmering with opalescent hues, like as if there was some kind of light emanating from it. The lumen naturae, as it was called in Latin. And Jung woke up and his heart was pounding. He knew immediately, he said, that he was not called to archaeology, as he thought, or philology, philosophy. It was natural science, just like William James, the father of American pragmatism, here in America. He also had a calling to natural science. So empirical depth psychology, Jungian psychology, is a science of the soul. It's a science of the psyche. And Jung always stayed true to that archetype throughout his entire life after that dream, that he devoted his entire life to the science of the unconscious, studying the symbolism of the unconscious. But that opens up to another dimension, and that's that dimension where there's an opening there in the endless snake, which you could say opens up to the cosmos, and also to matter, to the possibility that events can happen in our lives that are too improbable to just be merely chance. It could only be synchronistic. And I think my meeting Don Sander was like that because he was a real healer. And he studied under Navajo healers in Arizona. He talks about it in his book, Navajo Symbols of Healing. So I had the good fortune to work with Don Sander and also Bill Everson at the same time. And I want to show you a picture now of Jung's snake. You've seen this in the Red Book. It's a very wonderful illustration that shows the fire and the energy that's coming out of the mouth of the snake, up from the depths of the earth, or from the primal eruption, as Meister Eckhart called it, the place of the ground, the grunt, the ground of being. It comes up from the ground and then up into a cosmic kind of consciousness. I'm also a James scholar, William James. I wrote a book on James and Jung as well. 2016, I started that, and it was published in 2020 during the COVID crisis pandemic. But I want to focus on that for a minute because it gets at this idea that there's something at the core of the human psyche, a nuclear center, and out of that center comes the energies of the snake, you could say, as a symbol, a living symbol, and what Jung called a living symbol. And interestingly, the day that I graduated from Rosebridge Graduate School with my degree in psychology, a PhD here in Contra Costa County, I was driving up to my home in Orinda, in the hills right below Tilden Park, for those of you who know the Bay Area. And I hadn't seen a king snake for 20 years in nature. And on the day of my graduation, I was driving up the hill, and there was like a 4.5-foot king snake stretched out on the road. I just about ran it over. And I veered a little bit and looked in my rearview mirror. I saw the snake had coiled into a circle, just like this. So I put my car in reverse, opened the car door right by the snake, put it in my lap, and drove home and put it in a little terrarium that a friend had given me the day before. I didn't know why he gave it to me, but it was a terrarium for fish, but it's often used for herpetologists use them to collect lizards or snakes. So I put it in there, I gave it some water, and it was just like that, coiled like that. And it was almost in a trance because I think I had nicked its tail with the tire. But I hadn't seen a king snake in 20 years. And on that day, on my graduation, there it was in my lap and in my home. I let it go the next day after I gave it some water. up in the hills, but it was quite an experience. So there's Jung's snake, and that gives you an example of a synchronicity that it's just beyond probability that to me that it would happen like that. But what it did was it confirmed something, that I was on the right path, that I had followed the quest and I was on the right path. This idea also that there are individuals in our lives, figures of significance in the outside world who elicit something from us in a relational way. I called it nuclear also because of the analogy with fire, explosive force, which you see in Jung's picture, nuclear energy. Notice we have a physicist in the group here, and great intensities of inner light, which you can see emanating from the snake, and also the blue, which is, you could see the spectrums of the infrared to the ultraviolet spectrums of consciousness. And that's what Jung said is the psychoid level of the psyche, that is only psyche-like, but extends beyond what the eye can see, the visible light, to the invisible dimensions of the ultraviolet and infrared spectrums. So that would be the psychoid continuum that also extends to the world of matter. And that's where Wolfgang Pauli came in and really aided Jung in developing the language of nuclear physics to put forth this hypothesis or theory of synchronicity. Nuclear energy is created in the cosmos and psyche simultaneously. So once a vocational symbol is tapped into in depth, it can open up for a patient in analysis this connection to the inner and the outer universe, or the soul and nature, which are really one. So here's a concrete example of what I mean by nuclear symbol from the history of science, and that's the dream I told you from Niels Bohr. I talk about it in chapters 9, 11, and 12 of my book, which I hope you will enjoy. Thanks to Charlie and Will making it available to you. And Bohr's revolutionary insight occurred while he'd been wrestling with this problem of understanding the nature of the atom. So you can see how dream incubation takes place. You meditate on an idea, you work on it intellectually with great intensity, and then the mind exhausts itself and you fall into sleep or into reverie or into imagination. And then up can come a great solution. And he won the Nobel Prize in physics for that. So that later became known as the Bohr model of the atom. Each orbit of an electron was labeled by an integer quantum number, n. As it turns out, electrons can jump from one circular motion to another by emitting or absorbing nuclear energy. I didn't know this when I was making this hypothesis at Kennedy. I only found this out later when I looked it up, and found it was actually a theory in modern physics. And Bohr is named as one of the originators. So this innovation in science testifies to the significance of intuition in the birth of a powerful theoretical model for science. In brief, a nuclear symbol is defined by an elemental symbol, X, an atomic number, Z, and a mass number, A. And now an exact number of protons and neutrons in a nucleus can be counted with exact mathematical precision. For instance, oxygen is 18 is symbolized by 188 O, totaling 8 protons and 10 neutrons. That's very abstract physics. but it does speak to this idea in the sense of what I'm trying to convey to you about how a dream can transmit to you a very powerful idea. And this is the idea of simultaneity, what Jung calls the simultaneity of nuclear symbols. I talk about this in my book on William James quite extensively, because James had a big influence on Jung. Jung was reading James, and James got the idea of a pluralistic universe from Theodor Fechner, who is the father of modern psychophysics. So physics and depth psychology are intimately wedded in the same bed. And that's why relationships are so important, that there needs to be this ongoing interaction and dialogue between science and psychology. Here is Jung's diagram in the seminar on children's dreams about what's at the core of a dream's symbolism, and that's a nuclear center of meaning, that the dream emerges from a meaning that's already implicit, because obviously there's a dreamer dreaming us, although we don't always know it. In ancient Vedic Hindu mythology, that's Vishnu, who's the cosmic dreamer of the universe, and we are all a part of Vishnu's dream. It's just we haven't awakened yet to our role in the dream. And Shakespeare himself said, you know, all life is but a dream, and we're merely the actors. We have our entrances and our exits, and in one life, a man or a woman plays many parts, right? So that it's that idea that we have to wake up to the dream that's dreaming us. And this is a shamanistic idea that can be found in Australia, the Aboriginal people of Australia. So I like that diagram a lot in Jung's seminars on children's dreams. Jung actually did these seminars for 4 years, right before the outbreak of World War II. And he said that oftentimes a dream can emerge in very early childhood that can pattern a whole person's destiny. The whole destiny is foreshadowed in images. You see, this is the teleological function, the teleologische Funktion des Träumens in German, the teleological function of dreams. Jung got this idea from Alphonse Mader, who was a student of his, a psychoanalyst, in 1911, from a very important paper Mader published, which hasn't been translated into English yet, and I'd love to get a copy of it in translation, because my German isn't good enough to read the intellectual German, but it was a powerful influence on Jung, that these dreams point to a future. Teleology means perspective. It points to a future, a destination. And Jung said we have 2 destinations, 2 destinies. One is to the self within, the other is to collectivity without. So the idea is to bring that nuclear energy out from the center, and Jung was an introvert, an introverted introvert, into extroverted activity, into the world, where so that the world and the psyche are become one. There's an interconnection. Now, here's Jung's nuclear symbol right here. This is a picture that I took in 2008 of Atma Victu. Atma Victu is the breath of life. That's what the unconscious gave this name to. In Sanskrit, Victu means victory. So you could say this is the victory of the self for Carl Jung, that in 1920, right before the publication of Psychological Types, his great masterpiece on typology, he carved this little figure and put it in his garden. And it came from that dream from 3 years old of the little, of the phallus that was seated on a golden throne, but it was an 11-foot phallus. I don't know how a 3-year-old boy could have a dream like this. It's mind-boggling. But here it's a little figure. It's about 3.5 feet. tall, and he carved it in stone and placed it there by the tree. And I really love this figure. It's on the front cover of my book on William James and C.G. Jung. So there I talk about vocational doorways, doorways to the self. This symbol was a doorway for Jung to a higher understanding of the self that I think he had ever gotten to up to this time. He was 45 years old when he carved it in 1920. Now here is a picture of this boy who I worked with at Lincoln Child Center. He was a fire setter. He was placed at Lincoln because he was involved in pyromania. He had been lighting fires. He lit his mother's home on fire. Nobody knew what was going on. He was placed at Lincoln because he was a danger to self and others. And I was his therapist. And I did Jungian sand play therapy with him. This is his sand tray. And in the center is the fire. He had gotten control over his fire setting by this time. And there's the medicine man who was leading a dance to heal the animals around the periphery there that had been injured. You see the lion is on its side there. There had been some kind of injury to the animal psyche, you could say. The animals of the soul had been injured, particularly this lion. I asked him about it, and it was all related to the fact that he had been told that if he said anything about the sexual abuse at the Presidio daycare center where he was placed at the age of 4, they'd burn down the Presidio. And so you could see how the symbolism, first of all, the presenting problems, for those of you who are therapists and are interested in psychology and sand play, you could see how the presenting symptoms, fire setting, I mean, dressing in girls' clothing, stealing girls' underwear, that kind of thing, it all goes back to the early trauma at the Presidio from the age of 4. But here you see the psyche's natural tendency to heal itself through this kind of circularity. Jung called it circumambulatio in Latin, circumambulation around a center. The center was the fire, like you saw in the symbolism of the snake coming out from the primal fire of the unconscious. He had gotten control, ritual control over his fire setting. He did this sand play right before the outbreak of the Oakland firestorm that killed 25 people and burned down hundreds of homes here in the Oakland Hills. And when I managed to see him right after he did this tray and he got control over his fire setting behaviors, and because the inner voices were telling him to light fires, you see. He was white as a ghost, and he had been up hypervigilant for 2 days. He said, "I will never light another fire again." And that was it. And so I sent him back to live with his mother again. And he wanted to be a fireman when he grows up. And also a veterinarian, you see, to heal the healer. He wanted to heal the injured animals, you see. But anyway, I think this is a beautiful illustration of a child's sand play work that also illustrates this idea of a nuclear symbol, which was the healer, the shaman figure with the buffalo head dress who's leading the dance. One doesn't just stumble upon something like this without effort. It requires continuous discipline and good habits. It sometimes takes years of searching, studying, and an inner questioning to recollect it for oneself, you know? And also reverie, which I'm going to talk about during the experiential part of this presentation, which I hope you'll enjoy. Unless one has some good fortune of having it mirrored by parents, teachers, analysts, and adults during elementary school, middle school, or high school, a patient analysis may not be aware of what their vocational aptitude is, where their expertise is, where their sense of motivation is, because a calling, a vocation is not just where your talents lie, it's where your motivation is, it's where the source of your energy is. Because psychic energy, which Jung wrote an essay about, is, and also William James, The Energies of Men, it's a marvelous essay he wrote. It's all about generating that kind of energy that can go into our work. And it comes from a psychophysical foundation that I think is also metaphysical. Here's another picture of this boy's sand play where he's feeding the animals now from the fire and the cooking pot. You see, he's actually feeding the deer and healing the wounds of his injured animals. So this idea of the quest, you know, I really loved Black Elk Speaks. When I was at UC Santa Cruz, I wrote a 44-page essay on Black Elk's great vision when I was Everson's TA. And then after that, I found the book, The Sacred Pipe. And I just really loved that book because he talks about the importance of lament, crying for a vision, Hanblahaya, which I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, and Lakota Sioux means crying for a vision. And in analytical depth psychology, if there's no touching of the taproot through mourning, through grief work, it's hard to get to the core, the nuclear center of one's personality, which I think is this nuclear self. And so it's very important to go out in nature. I know that Charlie is really into photography. So going out into nature, and you have some beautiful places there in Arizona, those landscapes are just, landscape portraits are just so beautiful there. But, you know, this wasn't a real ordeal. I mean, these youngsters went out for 4 days and they cried for a vision because, you know, they were fasting. They didn't eat anything. Sometimes they didn't even have water. And they would go out on a lonely mountaintop all by themselves. And, you know, we just have lost touch with nature. And we need to, not all of us, but many of us, you know, who live in civilization in the city. And going out into nature is a way to reconnect with our deepest source of energy. Here's a painting I did. It's a watercolor of the king snake near Mount Diablo, where I grew up, and with an oak tree, and then a mortar and pestle from a Native American archaeological site that a friend of mine had been doing some research in. He was a master's degree archaeologist at Hayward State University. Anyway, I thought I'd show you that because this is an example of active imagination from my personal life. There's another mandala I painted with the king snake on a cross, and there's that boy's sand play again. Let me, before we get to the Jung, let me just read this beautiful passage from the Sacred Pipe. This is Black Elk of the Oglala Sioux tribe, where he says about the 7 rites of the Oglala Sioux. One was the vision quest, which I mentioned was very important to me from the age of 7 onwards. And I had a little yellow fiberglass bow that my father bought me with arrows, you know, and I'd go out shooting arrows. I turned out to be a real marksman or a archer, a really good archer. I was quite good in archery. And it's because I felt identified from my relationship with this young Apache boy from Arizona with Native American culture. And Black Elk says, I wish to mention here that through these rites, a threefold peace was established, a threefold peace. The first piece, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of men and women, I would add, when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers. And when they realize that at the center of the universe, the center, there's that nuclear center again, dwells Wakantanka, the sacred buffalo. And that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us. This is the real peace, he says, and the others are but reflections of this. The second piece is that which is made between two individuals, such as in analysis, an analytic relationship, or a depth psychological relationship, or a relationship with a mentor. If you're called to literature and you have a teacher, or if you're called to physics and you have a physics teacher, or a teacher in computer technology and science, that teacher can be one of these relations he's talking about, made between two individuals. And the third is that which is made between two nations. And boy, do we ever need to listen to this wisdom here now. But above all that, you should understand that there can never be peace between nations until there is first known that true peace. As I have often said, it is within the souls of men. And what the white buffalo calf woman brought to the Oglala people was the sacred pipe. And that's the name of the book I was just quoting from. Anyway, I love that quote. I notice I'm getting close to the time here. But we did start about 5 minutes after the hour, so I'm going to continue a little bit over. Because I want to get to something here that I don't want to lose track of. And that's this idea of typology. You know, that little figure I showed you that Jung carved of Atma Victu in his garden. This figure. He carved it in 1920 when he published Psychological Types. Now, when I was at Kennedy, I then started teaching vocational dreams to career counselors who were using the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, to help their clients, oftentimes in midlife, people who are in a midlife crisis, as it's called, or a middle passage, as James Hollis calls it, to reorient themselves in after 35 to 37, which is when Jung says midlife really kicks in. And that sure did, because he was 35 when he wrote Symbols of Transformation, or when he was in the process of beginning it. That's also when he met William James at Clark University, very important relationship for him. And that kind of first piece, you know, is a very peaceful thing to see this thing standing in Jung's garden. It's there by a evergreen. And Jung talks a lot about typology, the 8 different types. And I used to teach the career counselors that, you know, if you really look to the psyche to help solve these problems rather than to the type test, to the typology, then you might be able to have a breakthrough with the clients that you're working with, because oftentimes it comes from a dream, like this little figure did for Jung. And I had a hypothesis that actually the psychological type that we're born with actually comes from the vocation to which we're destined. That with the seed of one's destiny also comes a certain kind of typology that is unique to our personality. So it's important to know our typology through type tests, Myers-Briggs, but also the vocational dream can tell us a lot more than a type test. So I think that was very interesting to the career counselors. And here we go. Now we're looking at the Bollingen stone. This is the famous stone in Jung's garden. that he carved in 1951 or two, I believe it was. The stonemason had brought the wrong stone, and Jung took a look at the stone. It was the wrong shape. Rather than a hexagonal stone or a rectangular stone, I'm not sure what kind of a stone Jung had ordered, but it was not the stone he ordered. But when Jung saw the stone and it was square, he said, "No, don't take it away. That's my stone." So that's another instance of synchronicity that's very famous in Jung's biographies. And this is the little figure he drew at the center of the stone. His name is Telesphorus. Telesphorus is the little homunculus that comes out of that dream from the age of 3, the little phallic figure. He's carrying a lantern, and he let me read to you what Jung wrote. Now, this is in Latin and Greek, and it's difficult to read it, but it's translated, and it's got some interesting hieroglyphics on it with, a half moon and these symbolisms that were very significant for Jung. But it comes from a passage I was told last night at the Jung Institute in San Francisco, where I just gave a talk on vocational dreams at the library in our institute, that this actual quote on this Greek or Latin inscription comes from Heraclitus, who was the Greek philosopher. And it goes like this: "Time is a child, playing like a child, playing a board game, the kingdom of the child. This is Telesphorus, who roams through the dark regions of the cosmos and glows like a star out of the depths. He points the way to the gates of the sun and the land of dreams." I really love that. It's interesting. I didn't study to be a child psychotherapist. It literally happened that I saw an advertising for a line counselor at Lincoln Child Center at the residential intensive residential treatment program, and I applied for that job, and I got it, and it was perfect because I could do my internship there and get all my hours and get licensed. And but I specialized with children for over 20 years, and it's kind of a mystery how I got into that specialty. But now I work with the child and the adult. For the last 7 years, I've specialized mainly with adults. I don't see many children in my practice. I might have one coming in this week, but I work primarily with adults and couples now. Oftentimes young adults to midlife and beyond, into the 80s. So I had a interesting experience with a Hindu East Indian woman who came into my practice. She was in midlife and going through a very painful divorce with a couple of children, and she'd been working very hard as a mother and had neglected her sense of calling. As she had a calling as a poet, and she was having a lot of reveries in the work about being at Hindu temples in India. They went back to her 7th and 8th and 9th years, and she had a memory of an old sage, a rishi kind of figure, a seer, who came up to her at the Krishna temple and gave her a flute. And she knew at that young age that she was called to write poetry, but she'd neglected it, so she was pretty depressed. But after a period of time, she had this realization that her marriage, she'd been living in a cocoon, she said. And now she was experiencing a renewed sense of liberation and freedom. Moksha in Sanskrit was liberation or freedom. My butterfly is flying free, she said. We are happiness is my new mantra. So she really went through this kind of transformation process. And I only saw her for a short period, about 4 months. But it was amazing how much the dreams were present, and also her use of the metaphor of the butterfly. And so while I was seeing this patient, after I saw the patient, I was writing another book on Western yoga. As Will had introduced, I wrote a book on Jung and Western yoga. And when I was in the process of seeing that patient and publishing that book, I saw my wife, who is a Jungian analyst and a music therapist and does a lot of active imagination and teaches on dreams, saw this interesting chrysalis, or caterpillar in the stage of pupation. Right as this patient was reporting this dream to me, I thought, wow, that's amazing. Because I had planted this redwood, Sequoia sempervirens, they're called uh, uh, coastal redwoods. They're the tallest organism in the world, the tallest tree in the world. And they were all cut down up here in the Oakland Hills to build San Francisco and Oakland. So I've been planting some redwoods in the park. And sure enough, there was this beautiful creature on the redwood that I had planted, which was another kind of affirmation for me. I'm on the right path, I'm walking the red road, as Blackout called it, walking on the red road. And then I didn't know if I would be able to capture the metamorphosis of this caterpillar into. I knew I could get. I would see the chrysalis stage, because I had studied them as a boy. At 7, I used to study monarch butterflies on my way to school. At that same school, Strandwood Elementary, where I met Mrs. Rasmussen, I would study the monarch in their different stages of metamorphosis. And so here I was again observing this. I didn't know what kind of a creature would emerge from it. I was trying to guess what kind of a butterfly it would be. There it is. It's a Western swallowtail, and it's a gorgeous thing. We were actually walking 28 days after that first stage that I showed you. There was the, with wet wings and everything, drying its wings on the redwood sapling. And I thought I'd end with that because it shows how important vocational dreams are, both to one's inner life, working with patients, or working with a therapist, or doing botany, or being an entomologist, studying lepidoptery, a lepidopterist, which is the study of butterflies. It's a fascinating field, but it does show this correlation between the psyche and matter, a soul animal or insect, and a correspondence with the outside world that sometimes just seems, as Jung said about synchronicity, baffling. I like the word mind-boggling because it seems, it just makes sense. So I'm going to end there and open this up for some discussions. Then we're going to take a 15-minute break. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to stop the share now and come back to you. Thank you for that comment, Keith. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with my share here. So now we're going to go into the experiential part of the workshop. So now I've presented an overview of how I came into upon the notion of the nuclear symbol through vocational dream research at John F. Kennedy University and UC Santa Cruz. And I mentioned the dream that confirmed it about my elementary school teacher, Mrs. Rasmussen, and the connection to the vision quest that Charlie was talking about, because he has experience in the Black Hills, where Black Elk, oh, by the way, the Black Hills are considered the most holy and sacred ground of the vision quest. And so when the miners came in, the gold miners, with George Armstrong Custer, they were asking for trouble because you didn't mess with the Black Hills. And those Plains warriors, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, you know, they took Custer to task in the 7th Cavalry. It's a very, very historic moment in the history of our nation. So thanks for that, Charlie. I hope they canonize him. So I want to now plant the seeds for a Vocational Dreams experiential later on. I'm going to do a little bit of talking, and then we're going to get into this experiential and go on an excursion back into the historical recesses of your memory banks and see if, by meaningful chance, just by chance, no pressure here, you might go back to the age of 4, like one of your members did, and remember a dream from 4, or even earlier, like Jung at age 3. There may have been something numinous that was constellated by an event or a series of events in your childhoods. So in this section of the experiential portion of my presentation or workshop, I'll make some suggestions on journaling, which is in my description, to leave you with as a daily practice of writing down your dreams, whatever images and emotions come to mind, if you can remember them, of course, and we'll learn to enter the streams of consciousness, as William James said, in the moment, if we can. So dreams can also be spoken aloud into a voice recorder when you wake up in the morning or in the middle of the night, if you have a dream. Sometimes you're in a half-conscious state and you speak it into the voice recorder and you wake up in the morning and you forget what you even said. And then you play it and you said, my God, did I really dream that? So every 90 minutes we go through a rapid eye movement cycle. This is REM sleep. So we're dreaming every 90 minutes. So we're all dreaming, we just don't always know it. Feeling our interconnectedness with our dreams, we'll learn how to take instruction from them and relate them to our calling. Finally, we'll experiment with dream interpretation and poetic reverie, which is a technique I'll talk about, writing and active imagination. That's a tall order, and if I get to all that, I'll actually be surprised. So first, I want to review some words on poetic reverie, okay? It's a journaling technique you can make use of on your own in the future as a way to gain access to the subconscious streams of your mind that are continuously flowing in you, whether you're aware of it or not. And what follows are some reflections on Gaston Bachelard's beautiful little book, The Poetics of Reverie, published a year before C.G. Jung died, C.G. Jung auf Deutsch. In it, we can hear how profoundly the author was inspired by a deep reading of Jung's works, how much he took over the idea of the anima, or the soul, from Jung and applied it to the reverie process in poetry, philosophy, and depth psychology to attain a point of supreme meaning in his life through writing. The aim of his study on reverie was to put us in the right path. Whether we're psychotherapists, writers, analysts, scientists, or artists, whatever our vocation, interpreters, linguists, whether as whatever your vocation is, to awaken the muse of poetry and wake up our linguistic destinies as speakers of the word in whatever profession we're called to work in. Now, my father was a linguist, so I grew up, as I was mentioning to Charlie in the break, speaking 3 languages. German was my first language. My grandmother came from Germany to mother me when I was 6 months old in Pacific Grove. And so I heard that language was the first language. So I have a good pronunciation and a good accent, but my vocabulary is not sufficient to read Jung in intellectual German. But nevertheless, I really have an ear for languages and music because my father was a violinist and was studying music for his master's degree at San Jose State when I was a child. So we would hear the violin every day, and he would play very difficult pieces by Bach, such as the, well, I don't need to get into the pieces, but really a wonderful violinist. So Bachelard also had an ear for music, for poetry, the music of poetry. And he said, poetry is one of the destinies of speech. It is through the intentionality of poetic imagination that the poet's soul discovers the opening of consciousness common to all true poetry. Here's my book again. Here's the passage I'm reading, if you want to read along. A reverie which poetry puts on the right track. The track of an expanding consciousness follows. This reverie is written. It is already facing the great universe of the blank page. Then images begin to compose and fall into place. The whole universe comes to contribute to our happiness. When reverie comes to accentuate our repose. You must tell the man or woman who wants to dream well to begin by being happy. So you might use that as a practice before you go to sleep. You can put yourself in a state of happiness before you go to bed. Then reverie plays out its veritable destiny. It becomes poetic reverie, and by it, in it, everything becomes beautiful. If the dreamer had the gift, he would turn his reverie into a work. Poetic reverie gives us the world of worlds. Poetic reverie is a cosmic reverie. It is an opening to a beautiful world, to beautiful worlds. So this gets back to Michelle's question about consciousness. Poetic reverie is a cosmic reverie. It's a reverie of cosmic consciousness. And this was my first experience at the age of 2. My first memory looking out on the end of Ocean Avenue towards the vast Pacific with the sun beaming off the glistening white sand and the waves crashing and this eternal rhythm of the waves rocking me as I ebbed and flowed with the ocean of life, Walt Whitman said. Out of the cradle, endlessly rocking, this idea of something rocking our cradle. So the accent, I bring in American poets because that's my specialty. Walt Whitman, Herman Melville, and Emily Dickinson, William Everson, Robinson Jeffers. I've made a real study of our American poets and California poets. Bachelard specialized with French poets, and my second language was French. My mother's French. And so I heard that voice of my mother and my German grandmother, the French and the German. And then English came. By the time I got to kindergarten, I was way behind. My English lagged behind my German and French. But those languages were very resonant, and I had an ear for poetry because of the linguistics, the language. But as you know, Jung tapped into this wellspring himself in Liber Novus, the Red Book. He got in touch with the mytho-poetic imagination and with the beauty of poetry. A lot of the lines in the Red Book are pure poetry. So where did I get in touch with this? It wasn't at first through reading Nietzsche, Schiller, and Goethe in Europe. As for Jung, it was through the American poets. Although I did read Nietzsche, Schiller, and Goethe as well, not in German as I think Charlie did. We need poetry's voice to assist us, such as I found at the University of California at Santa Cruz, where this term vocational archetype was coined by this man, my mentor, friend, and teacher, William Everson, who I loved and who really loved me. He had that Dominican sense of brotherly love, that he transmitted to me. And I also was practicing yoga, Iyengar yoga and meditation, was studying Buddhism and Hinduism at UC Santa Cruz. At the same time, I was studying Meister Eckhart, Catholic theology. So this gateway to cosmic reverie is opened up. Cosmic reverie possesses a sort of stability, Bachelard says, or tranquility. It helps us escape from time, the tyranny of time. It's a state, he said. Let us get to the bottom of this essence, he says. It's a state of mind. And that's the state of mind of the child looking out at the waves, such as in the dream I mentioned of the king snake boy looking out at the Pacific. So I don't know if the healer was there in the king snake, but that's a very interesting question. This is about you. So I want to really make this about your group, the Friends of Phoenix Friends of Jung. What kind of a mental state is it? How can you experience it? How can it be used to heal us? Can journaling help us enter into it? If we know how to make it a daily habit, if we use, discipline and good habits, it all depends on a poet's inflections. There are modulations and variations of affect, emotion, to awaken it in our own souls. And this man was in touch with powerful emotion. When he was on platform and he read a poem, it was electrifying. And you felt it, by God. It was numinous and powerful. Jung had the same experience in reading Goethe, and so did Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud said if there was anyone he would want to be, it would have been Goethe. Now, Jung's reveries on childhood began to take shape after his break with Freud. And I showed you the picture. This is another angle on the little figure, Atma Victu. Jung's reveries on childhood were recalled in that dream from the age of 3. He was playing a little game with stones by the Lake of Zurich, put a little red pyramidal stone on the top of a church that he had built out of stones and wood. And when he did that, he remembered his dream from the age of 3. How is that? Well, he had given up his career as Privatdozent at the University of Basel. He was a professor in psychiatry, and he gave it up. He gave up his editorship for the Jahrbuch of psychoanalysis. He broke with Freud and the Viennese group, and he engaged in this method he called active imagination in the Black Books and the Red Book. and it took him deep. It took him down into the well springs of his creativity. And this is the little figure he did in 1920 that represents the creative impulse, the phallic creative drive towards consciousness, because on the top of the phallus, 11-foot phallus on the throne, it was like a golden throne, was an eye that was looking straight upward, mysteriously, with an aura around its head, an eye of consciousness, you see. Jung's whole theory of individuation is about the myth of the expansion of consciousness that he discovered in Taos, New Mexico, when he talked with Mountain Lake, the holy man of the Taos Pueblo tribe. And then he went to East Africa in the same year, 1925, and had his big revelation there that gave him his myth of meaning. But here it's already in a nuclear seed form. It's there in the symbol. It's there as waiting its discovery in 1920. 5 years later, it would burst into consciousness, and he would give to the world later his myth, the myth of the expansion of consciousness, the creative expansion, and it's all there. So this is a picture of the book I wrote with William Everson. We co-authored it, William Everson, The Shaman's Call. These were the interviews I did, the conversations I had with Everson before his death in Santa Cruz. And the redwoods, he lived in the redwoods up in the mountains. And that's the transcripts of the conversations, as well as my commentaries, and a lot on the Vision Quest and Vocational Dreams, because a lot of the questions I asked him were about the theory of the vocational archetype, and I brought in my theory of the nuclear symbol, and he ended up telling me stories about his childhood, which confirmed my hypothesis. Now, nothing spoke to me in a more direct way about what Bachelard was talking about with regards to poetic reverie than this woman right here, Emily Dickinson. This is a portrait, a daguerreotype from 1847 to 1848. She was about 17 or 18 years old when it was taken. It's the only picture we have of her. There are words, Bachelard wrote, in which the feminine element impregnates every symbol. Such words are reverie words. They belong to the language of the anima, the soul. The soul, as we know from the reading of Jung, is beyond gender. Women too have a feminine soul. Literary friendships, such as I shared with Everson at UC Santa Cruz, can also be therapeutic. Poetry and writing can be deeply healing. They can be medicinal, provide soothing medicine for the soul. Reverie words are the very stuff of poetry. Every syllable of the poet hangs on impregnation. Liberation in Bachelard's mind means to become psychically pregnant with the feminine, or to inseminate the feminine, a relational process whereby our entire soul is impregnated with the influence of the anima. This impregnation to Bachelard was an inspired state, a poetics in anima. For the nucleus, now listen to this, the nucleus of the feminine bathes in every soul. The nuclear symbol, the nucleus of the feminine, the nuclear symbol has a lot to do with the feminine, because it starts with the mother, which is our first, the first voice, or it could be the father too. But oftentimes the father plays a maternal role in the early stage of the infant's development. a maternal father. So what is the nucleus of the feminine? How can we penetrate into its archetypal cores of meaning and allow our souls to bathe in it? Bachelard quoted Jung by saying in his own words, "I have defined the anima very simply as the archetype of life." She's the archetype of life. Those are Jung's words. The archetype of life is our calling to sing, to dance, to write, or to teach others out of our own ground of being, not through imitation of someone else's style. The urge or instinct of individuation leads us to become who we were potentially destined to be. And nobody did it more for me than her. When I wrote my book on Emily Dick, actually it was a 70-page essay in 1995, after I finished my conversations with Everson. He was put to rest at the cemetery in Benicia, and I carried his coffin to the burying ground. Then I found Dickinson, and she awakened something in me like nobody else. She said, "I know if I feel that the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. It's being struck by lightning. It's that lightning bolt." She wrote bolts of melody, as she called it. So this is the book that I wrote during my candidacy at the Jung Institute of San Francisco. It was published in 2018, right before I was certified. And I'd been nurturing that work for well over 10 years when I started to shape up the manuscript for publication. It's published by Fisher King Press. Mel Matthews was the publisher. So why so much poetry? Well, because the poet is the one who leads us in. It led Freud into the discovery of the unconscious. It led Jung into the discovery of the collective unconscious. Goethe was his primary source book, and Nietzsche, also Sprach Zarathustra. He spent 5 years doing seminars. I have them in my collection, 1,400 pages of transcript of Jung's seminars on Zarathustra. And Schiller, he has a whole essay on Schiller in Psychological Types. So poets were, this is a picture of me at the National Cathedral in Washington. I was invited to give the bicentennial talk on Walt Whitman's conception of spiritual democracy. And that's a carving of Adam above my head, the first Adam. I'm going to skip ahead here because there's a lot of material, and I want to get into this experiential part, which we need to have time for. But I think I've pretty much covered the main points in Bachelard. Here's another quote by Bachelard, which you can read for yourself if you'd like. It has a lot to do with peace. You know what Black Elk said about first peace. When the human world leaves him or her in peace, then you feel like the son or daughter of the cosmos. And he talks about the solitude and the happiness of dreaming. Because rêve en français is dreaming, is the dream. Le rêve. So reverie comes from the Latin word for dreaming. And that's the happiness of the poets. There I am at that beach in Carmel at the Robinson Jeffers lecture that I gave down there. But that's that white sand beach, and those are the waves behind me, and I'm pretty happy, I think. My wife took that picture. So in these happy solitudes, the dreaming child knows the cosmic reverie. I love that. This is Bachelard again. That unites us to the world. You see the connection between reverie and the connection to the world through relationships. And then again, he mentions we ought to find the nucleus of childhood. Reading Bachelard, I said, that's it. That confirmed my hypothesis too. He's talking about the same thing. And the poets are the ones who discovered this, and the shamans, and the seers, the ancient rishis of India. They all were onto this. So, and there's my book on Walt Whitman. I'm running on the sand there in Carmel. I was a track runner in high school. Took fourth in California State meet in my senior year in the mile relay with my buddies. But that's a great beach to run on. And whoever goes to the bottom of reverie rediscovers the natural reverie. A reverie of the original cosmos and the original dreamer. The dreamer who's really dreaming us and who we need to awaken to. The world is no longer mute. Poetic reverie revives the world of original words. Those are French and German words to me. The voice of the poet is the voice of the world. That's my William James book with that little figure of Carl Jung on the front. And there's a picture of a Morgan silver dollar. This is the Liberty silver dollar. And I have it here because I was painting my bathroom with my wife, Lori, and she had a little change purse that she had. We moved into the house in 2001. And in 2013, when we were painting the bathroom, I'd been working on this poem by Emily Dickinson. And the poem was written to a friend of hers on the Pacific coast of California, down in LA. And she put the poem in the letter to her friend. And this is the year before she died. She died in 1886. And it goes like this: take all away from me, but leave me ecstasy, and I am richer than all my fellow men. Ill it behooveth me to dwell so wealthily, when at my very door are those possessing more in abject poverty. Emily Dickinson published 7 poems in her lifetime. 7 to 11. It's not clear how many there actually were, because some were later discovered, but 7 poems out of 1776. And that was a tragedy. But when she was told that her poetry was too soft, too feminine to publish, and that she should change her lines in the verse technique, take out her dashes and punctuation, she said, my barefoot rank is better. My barefoot rank is better. When a boy and barefoot, I more than once at noon espied a whiplash unbraiding in the sun. This is a dream poem about a memory she had as a little girl seeing a snake in her garden and being surprised by it. And then she says at the end, and never felt a tighter breathing and 0 at the bone. So she had this sense of that fear of the snake that stops you in your tracks. But when she said, my barefoot rank is better, and she said in her poem, Snake, when a boy in barefoot, see how she changed the gender? When a boy in barefoot, her barefoot rank was better. The way of the snake, follow the path of the snake. She knew that was her calling. I have a whole chapter on that in my book, the calling of the snake. she was a real lover of science, an entomologist, a botanist. She studied volcanology. She was our first scientific poet. But I found this coin in my wife's purse. I didn't know why the hell she gave it to me at that precise moment that I was translating that poem and writing about it in my manuscript, and she gave it to me. And there was the date of the poem, 1885. That's when she wrote the poem. And I was mind-boggled because the chapter I was writing was on Emily Dickinson as a goddess of liberty, the medicine woman. And there's the statue that we hope will become manifest very soon. Liberty will become triumphant over the toxic masculine that's infecting our beautiful nation. And there's a picture I took at Chaco Canyon of the doorways to the self that became part of my book on William James. I love this picture because of the golden light. This was an astronomical observatory, really, for the ancient Anasazi people. This is where they went down into their kivas to worship the sun and the equinoxes and the solstice. And everything is aligned in Chaco Canyon according to the path of the ecliptic and the solar and the lunar cycles. It's just a remarkable place to visit, as some of you may have already been there. And that's the book on spiritual democracy with the flag that's Edward Church. It was painted after the shots were fired on Fort Sumner that ignited our Civil War, American Civil War. So I used it as the front cover of my book, where I mentioned Dickinson. And here's a quote by Herman Melville's in his masterpiece, the greatest American novel, Moby Dick. In Loomings, where he gives his reasons for going to sea, he talks about the fates and providence that sent him on his whaling voyage. Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States, whaling voyage by one Ishmael, bloody battle in Afghanistan. I think that should speak to you right now as we're nearing our presidential election. How prophetic and how much of a dream that book is. The deeper I go into that book, the more I see he was written out of a dream state. He was in constant poetic reverie. The whole book is pure poetry. He squeezed whale oil into pure poetry. This is a picture of another sand play. We had Natasha, I think, was interested in the sand play of that boy. This is a 5-year-old boy who had seen the movie Moby Dick, starring Gregory Peck as Ahab, Captain Ahab, the dictator aboard the ship, the Pequod, named after the Pequot tribe that was exterminated by white settlers. And there's Captain Ahab with his ivory leg, whalebone leg, cut from a sperm whale's jawbone. And there's Moby Dick. I painted that sperm whale white for the boy. He wanted to play it all out in the sand because he was having nightmares, terrifying nightmares of the white whale coming up and wanting to eat him. It's the basic Jonah and the whale story that Melville narrates in chapter 9 of Moby Dick. But I was stunned because I was writing an essay on Melville's vision of evil, what was published at the IAAP, the International Association for Analytical Psychology. Murray Stein put it up on the website. He's a very famous Jungian analyst, as some of you know, and he loved my essay, told me it was brilliant, so he put it up. And I was stunned when this boy walked into my office and told me he was having nightmares. He jumped up on my couch with a sword And he started throwing it down at the carpet, and his mother was trying to hold him back. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm spearing whales." I said, "What?" "I'm spearing whales." I said, "Did you see a movie by any chance?" He and another friend, a 4-year-old friend, had been left unsupervised by their parents, and they watched the movie. He was having terrifying nightmares of the white whale, and he was poking girls with pencils at school. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm spearing whales." He's poking girls with pencils. We had to get this boy's anger under control. And so that's what his therapy was about. And here's another picture of the white whale circling the ship. And that's the way the novel ends, as you know, the white whale. It's a book based on the disaster of the Essex disaster in 1920. Melville was born in 1819. The following year, the Essex was sunk by an enraged bull sperm whale that sank the ship. And here the boy was playing all this out before my eyes, synchronistically. And there's Captain Ahab and his demise, the dictator aboard the Pequod. So we can only hope that Melville's prophecy will become true. So that's the end of my presentation. I skipped a lot, but I want to get back to you. Stop the screen share now, and I want to, now that we've kind of gotten into this, the atmospherics of poetic reverie, I hope it spoke to some of you and you're still with me. I haven't lost you. I want to move forward now and do something experiential, and that is have you all do a brief, it's not going to be too long, because I know Charlie wants to end at 12:25 when he has some things he wants to say, and then we might have 5 minutes at the end where I can say a few closing words. But right now, let's see. So I want you to do this. I want you all to just, first of all, just listen to what I'm going to read, and then we'll do this exercise together, a shared experience. So close your eyes. This is what you're going to do, and or keep them open slightly, like focusing on your breath at your own pace, feeling yourself sinking into your body, and notice if there are any sensations, feelings, images, or thoughts that are present there. If you find yourself wandering, just bring yourself gently back to the present. Take some deep breaths. Inhale and exhale. Allow yourself to engage with words, rhythms, energies, images, and notice whatever arises inside of you. And just be there with yourself, feeling the rising and falling of your breath, and whatever comes through in the streams of your consciousness. How do the words and images that arise make you feel? What words, sensations, bodily sensations, or symbols arise in you? So just allow yourself to engage in an inner dialogue now, an inner conversation, or in a way you can relate to something transcendent, perhaps. Maybe, if you're open enough, something numinous, spiritual, or instinctual, whatever you experience there. So just stay with this experience now. And then when you're ready, maybe after a few minutes or so, pick up a pen or begin writing or typing into a computer or just reflect silently in mindfulness meditation on whatever words flow through you. And just breathe into this and take some time. Let's take it maybe 5 minutes or so to just try and experiment. And I'll ring a bell when I'll bring us back to the group. So you can keep your eyes closed if you like, and continue if you're still engaged in a dialogue, an internal dialogue. But I want to be mindful of the time and invite anyone who'd like to say something to go ahead and unmute yourself. If Charlie, if that's the way it works, that they can unmute themselves, okay.
To do it, but shall we,
I was
think
waiting.
pretty much
I knew it was coming.
So anyway, I would like to thank Dr. Harriman for his presentation. I think this is really fantastic. Vielen Dank, Herr Dr. Harriman. I also want to thank our board members because there's a lot of moving parts to our organization, and it would not be possible without them. And I'd particularly like to thank Will for getting in contact with Dr. Herman and sort of setting up this fantastic presentation. So I will have the recordings available in the next couple of days. And if there's anything else you'd like to leave us with momentarily, Dr. Herman, the floor is yours. Otherwise, I think we'll go our separate ways then.
Yeah, well, I see we're at time. I had a few concluding words that I wrote down, but I'll just say what comes to mind as I look at it. Cast off your old snake skins. I think one of you talked about shedding of the skin. So, let yourself feel the awakening of your new serpent energies. Allow yourself to write and speak with the whole rhythms of your body. Stay focused in your vocal center. Allow your imagination to become equal to your speech. Let your words become equal to your vision. If you stop to listen, you'll hear the poem of your body speaking, chanting earth words, which are sacred, transformational, utterly real, like the forest that you wanted to enter, one of you. Enter the forest. Write frequently in your journals and go out alone or with a friend on walking meditations, which I'm sure many of you do. Feel your interconnectedness with your dream animals and take instructions from them. Okay? So anyway, just a few parting words. I'm really glad to have been able to do this presentation, and I want to thank you again, Charlie and Will, especially to have first of all invited me, and all of the friends of the Phoenix, Jung, the Friends of Jung. I think it's just wonderful, these kinds of societies, what you're doing, and yeah, it's been meaningful, and thanks for your participation, all of you, your presence. So yeah, have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Thank you in the chat section. I see that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna shut down the.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Herman.
Thank you. Appreciate it.